postmodernity and its impact on Christianity. So there are these issues that we have to deal with when it touches on the relationship between church and theology on the one hand and postmodernity. What does the church do when it finds that the big story of Christianity is no longer accepted as it was in days past? What does it do when the postmodern person says, okay, you believe in Christ? Well, fine. But there are a number of world religions, and okay, one is not better than the other. There are all ways, maybe, to some form of truth ultimately. So how can the church, in that kind of climate where everything seems to be of the same value, how can we maintain the uniqueness of Christ and the fact that, no, not everybody's opinion is the same, counts for the same, has the same value. There is truth. Maybe not in quite the same way as we explained it in the past, but Christians must maintain that there is some truth, capital T. Otherwise, there is no reason to exist. The issue of authority, very much an issue in the postmodern thinking. The Bible, interpretation. Now, let me see, we have places here. Welcome. Of course, how many denominations do we have in the world? Actually, nobody knows. But I read somewhere there are more than 10,000. They all read the Bible. So it's no wonder that some people are somewhat skeptical and say, how come when you all read the same book, you come to so many different conclusions? We all interpret. So in the past we would argue, well, one interpretation is better than the other. The Adventist interpretation, of course, is the best. But postmodern people will say, yeah, you see, you interpret a book, any text, the Bible included, has as many interpretations as it has readers. That's just reality. So what do? And all these denominations, organizations, institutions, some of them come and go. What do we say? When people tell us, is it so complicated? If you talk about truth, is it so complicated to find the truth? Is that the kind of result? And many of these denominations, of course, they seem to exist just trying to survive, to look after their own interests. And what they want is usually your money in particular. And there is the element of commitment that we talked about already. That's a major challenge for the church to get that commitment from their members as they used to have in the past. Many postmodern people are still in search of something, God. But how can the postmodern person find God if there is no certainty anywhere? If you cannot really define truth in any final, absolute way, if God is, the other, out of reach, absent, and then there is, in the postmodern mindset, often mysticism, intuition, that replaces the kind of knowledge about God that is more doctrinally based. Enormous challenges for the postmodern person, for the church. There is the issue of proofs of God's existence. And most people would say, well, there is no final proof. So some would say there are flashes of God once in a while. You know, you see the light, as it were, that there is something beyond. But once you reject an authoritative exposition of biblical truth, then what are you left with? Yes, there is this almost New Age belief in angels and miracles, but a definite rejection of the patriarchal God that we find in particular in the Old Testament. That's a very difficult thing for postmodern people, to read the Old Testament and see the kind of God that they believe is being portrayed there. As far as people have an interest in looking for God in religion, then they are not very keen on having a prescribed doctrinal package. They pick and choose. They are, in particular, interested often in the issue of justice and peace. This element of the doctrinal package, we'll come back to that, because that is one of the major problems in the Seventh-day Adventist modern, postmodern continuum, where there are many, especially on the official side of the church, who say, look, here we have the package. 28 fundamental beliefs. That's what it is. And you better believe in all of them. You better defend all of them. And if you're a pastor and you have some doubts about one or two, you better keep quiet. Because you're supposed to take the whole deal. Whereas many, now I don't know whether that is the situation also in where you live and where you work, but there are many who would say, okay, yes, Pastor, I want to be baptized. But you know, there are just some things that I just don't understand or I just don't accept. Is it okay for me to just believe these things without being sure about the rest? Now, many pastors find ways of baptizing those people anyway. But, you know, you're actually not supposed to do that. People are supposed to accept all the 28 fundamental beliefs. Although, I see some interesting things in our church. Have you heard about this great baptismal campaign in Rwanda last year? How many people did they baptize? 115,000, I believe, huh? In a relatively short period. Okay, I'm sure they all understood all 28 fundamental beliefs, right? We have to assume that. So there are different ways even how some of the top leaders of the church deal with that. But it's also one of the issues between modern and postmodern Adventism. Modern Adventism, you define exactly what you must believe in order to belong to the group. Postmodern Adventism, you are an individual. You pick and choose. And nobody should tell you what you have to pick and what you have to choose. If you feel that that is enough for you to belong to this movement, to this church, that's all you're required to do. That's the difference between modern and postmodern. If it's not here, it's coming. Well, I'm not going to say too much about similarities and differences between New Age and postmodern, but there are definitely some similarities and some differences. But I want to focus on when we see all these problems now that the church is facing, our church also. What is the solution to get us out of this quagmire? For some, the only solution is to go back to fundamentalism. We see that happening in Christianity at a major scale. And we see that some of the more conservative fundamentalist churches, for instance in the United States, are the most successful at the moment. That there are many people who think, well, when everything seems to be, floating and nothing seems to be sure, we'd like to go back to something where we can hang on to, which we know this is it. And there is this going back to fundamentalism. Now, we believe as Seventh-day Adventists that we have never been fundamentalists. And we are not fundamentalists. Well, the story is a bit more complicated than that. Fundamentalism originated in the United States in the late 1920s, late 1930s. There was a movement in Protestantism to go back to the fundamentals. There was a number of theologians, especially at the Princeton University, who wrote a series of booklets, The Fundamentals. And one of the fundamentals they believed was the verbal inspiration and the non-errancy of the scriptures. And although Seventh-day Adventists have never subscribed to that officially, we have in many places in the world from time to time, and certainly also today, subscribed to this very fundamentalism. And that has been the answer of one part of the church of the uncertainty that the postmodern way of looking at things has brought. Is that the answer? Fundamentalism. Some of you have been fundamentalists. I hope not too many of you are. I have been a fundamentalist. When I was a student at Newbold College, way back, I was a fundamentalist. And it has taken me time to come loose from fundamentalism. One of the teachers at Andrews, where I went for my master's, helped me a great deal in helping to see that that really cannot be the answer, because some of the things that fundamentalists say simply don't hold water. So, but is that the answer? It's a possibility, according to some. Some say, no, we need a kind of synthesis. Forms of theology that have integrated postmodernism. Now, if I were teaching a college class on the topic, I would spend a full hour on the different kinds of theological syntheses that have been developed over time. None of them is very convincing, in my view. What I would like to say this morning is we need to be critical in our choice. There are some elements in postmodernism that we must say no to. Otherwise, there is no Adventism, no Christian religion that is worth speaking of left. There are some things that are absolutely no. There are some things in postmodernism that are actually not so bad, that are, I would say, even positive. So let's not say because it's postmodernism, we won't have anything to do with it. No, there are things that can help us. In particular, in finding a balance between our ratio and our feelings. Now, we have a problem as Seventh-day Adventists in that we have overemphasized in the past, often, theoretical truth. We have overemphasized well, our doctrines have been mainly a matter of, are we right or wrong? What are the arguments for and against? A very cerebral kind of exercise. And we have often been rather poor on expressing our emotions. Now, you probably have less of a problem of that in Africa than some of us would have who come from a Calvinistic background in Europe. It depends on the culture, very much true, and that's true in other parts of the world as well. You know, I lived for a number of years in Great Britain when I was working at the division office there, and you know, the British, they can be extremely reserved, and now I hope I'm not going to offend anyone, but you know, they can be so reserved that you find it very difficult to know what they're actually thinking. You know, behind the curtains are closed. Then you go and preach in a Caribbean church for the first time in London. I remember going there for the first time, and you know, I had just gone, and I thought I was doing pretty well, and somebody shouted, "Help him, Lord, help him!" You know, that's a different kind of situation. But, yeah, preach it, brother, preach it. Yeah. Okay. But there is a great need in the church in general and in our personal religious experience to have this balance between mind and feeling.
A young man told me the other day, "Don't tell me, show me."
Yeah. Well, but in the end, you also have to tell people something, you know. Okay. And there is one term that you find all the time when you, especially when you read these difficult books by these French philosophers. And that's the term deconstruction. The postmodern person says, whenever you meet some kind of decision taken by people, or you read some historical text, or even some contemporary text, you must always deconstruct that. You must always find what is behind those words. You must always find what kind of manipulation is taking place, and where things do not quite fit together. So we'll come back to that, because I think that that is actually a very important point. There is a book with the title, "What Would Jesus Deconstruct?" And when you go through the Gospels, you see actually quite a few examples of things that he deconstructed. So let's try to find some answers. I think we must, as Seventh-day Adventist Christians, when we look at the postmodern worldview, we must conclude, I think, that it leaves us with utter emptiness. There is no certainty, no absolute truth, no absolute norms. Where are we? And I think that, you know, without getting into the debate of creation and evolution this morning, but in the end, I think whatever way we explain creation, or we talk about intelligent design, something like that, that word, that everything has an origin, not just in fate, but that God is somewhere at the basis, at the beginning of everything. That, I think, we must maintain is the most logical position to take. So I think that's one of the starting points when we try to sort these things out. And that there is a moral lawgiver. How else would there be some kind of conscience that you see in most people that live in this world if it was not given to people? Some distinction between good and evil. There must be some moral lawgiver. And there are many different ways of looking at men, but the Christian view of who we are and what we can become is, I think, the most satisfying way of looking at the human person. So that is, I think, some of the points of departure that I would like to take when we talk about, where do we go in this discussion between modern and postmodern. Is there truth? That is a key question that will always come back to us. Is there truth? Absolute truth, a firm foundation. People speak in philosophy about foundationalism. Is there that kind of basis that is undeniable? You have no counter argument. And, well, of course, we look at the traditional proofs for the existence of God. When you come into the forest and you suddenly see a garden that is well tended, and you see a house, then you must come to the conclusion that there has been somebody who has actually built that house and has made that garden. So that kind of proofs for the existence of, there must be someone who has created, who has made everything, who is there. The final cause, every result must have a cause, so there must be a first cause. These arguments, they may still have some value, but they will at most tell you that there is something somewhere. But they will not bring you to the kind of God that we meet in the Bible. They will not bring you to the Father of our Jesus Christ. You need more than that. Is there really that kind of proof? In the end, many people who have written thick books about that, they have said no, there is no absolute proof. But there is enough evidence for us to have that kind of faith. Philosophers of religion call that moderate foundationalism. And one of the great writers on this topic is the person that I've mentioned there, A. Plantinga. Plantinga is a Dutch name, but he lives in the United States. He has worked at Calvin College and later at Notre Dame University, and he has written this book, Warranted Beliefs. That has helped me personally a great deal in thinking this through. And if you have any questions yourself about this particular basic topic, that is a book I fully recommend. It's not old, it's not simple, but it's not Karl Barth, and he comes to the conclusion, no, but there is enough belief to build on, warranted beliefs. And he also refers to another philosopher, Quine. He's an American philosopher, and he uses that image which I like very much. That is when you have a spider and you have a web. When you take one thread, that's not very strong. But when you see all the threads in the web coming together, it builds something that is very strong and cohesive. And so he says there are so many arguments that you can pull from that point in that direction, that are like a web that can give you the full confidence that there is coherent truth. And then most people will also say, and I will also support that view, and that is it may be difficult to have absolute proof that God exists, but it's much more difficult to have absolute proof that God does not exist. So why don't we go with the former? So we can believe that there is some basis for our belief, for believing in a God who is there, who is at the beginning of everything. And I would like to argue that total relativity when it comes to the different world religions does not make sense. The postmodern person will say, well, Buddhism and Islam and Christianity, they're all in the same range. No, because not everything that is contradictory can be true at the same time. So some must be more true than the others. And so I think that postmodern argument is not very strong, that everything can be true at the same time. That's of equal value. Well, Christ is a historical person. It's a consistent and coherent story that we read in the Bible. And, you know, some people wonder, where does the church come from? And did Christ actually raise from the dead? Well, you have people who are totally frustrated, totally disappointed. They're ready to quit. Just a little later, there is a church with thousands of people, and these frustrated people, they are at the center of this movement. Something must have happened that really made them change their mind. That must be what happened to Jesus Christ. Well, some people may not find that a scientific argument, but for me it works. And I think the Christian life is something that also works for us, works for me at least. So, you know, there are lots of questions that we may have and the postmodern person may have. But we are not totally empty-handed when we face his questions and when we face his objections. There are some things from which we can start arguing. Now, faith, is it worthwhile to have faith? Many postmodern person will say, you know, why is it that you have faith and I don't? Well, that is a difficult question. Some people say, I would like to have faith, but I don't. I mentioned a book just a couple of minutes ago. I would like to mention another author, Ricoeur. He is a French philosopher, and he talks about the leap of faith. He says, if you're not sure, then just take the leap, and just for the time being, as an experiment, accept that faith is true and take it from there. And he compares it also to learning a language. You know, I have learned the Swedish language because my son lives in Sweden and I want to speak and talk to my grandchildren. There's no better place to learn Swedish than to be in Sweden. And that's true for learning any language, to be. And Ricoeur says, if you want to have faith, he says this to a postmodern person, if you want to have faith, go there where the language of faith is spoken. And there, you know, imbibe yourself into that environment. And that will greatly help you to take this leap of faith. And he emphasizes in saying, knowing does not always require scientific proof. I have no scientific proof that my wife is not unfaithful to me at this very moment. No. But I know she isn't. It's not scientific proof, it's a different kind of knowledge. And so not all knowledge needs to be based on scientific proof. And when we are dealing with the Bible, to convince the postmodern person that it is a special book, It helps to take a recent version, and it helps the person to start reading the Bible stories. And I'm a great believer in reading the Bible rather than studying the Bible. Just reading the Bible, sections of the Bible, from one point to the other. And skip the things that you don't understand, but get the message. It comes to you. And that is what happens to many postmodern people once they actually immerse themselves in the Bible, that they find that the Bible is what they would call self-authenticating, that there is the experience that comes, that the Bible has something that other texts, other books do not have. Do not tell the postmodern people not to be preoccupied with the question of, is it historical all the time? You can argue, until you see it. Red in the face, I believe the expression is. But make them look for the truth. What is it that the story wants to tell us? What is the essence of what is being? And have an open mind. Now, the postmoderns say that the grand story is no longer valid. There are no longer all-encompassing, kind of umbrella truth that. But they forget one thing, that the very statement to say there is no grand story is a grand story. That must apply to everything. You often see that also in philosophy. When you have philosophers that say the only things that you can actually experience, that you can see and sense, are true. Well, how do you prove that by your senses, that statement is true? So the postmoderns face a similar problem. And so why can we not, for the time being at least, take the story of Jesus as our maker story? And why can we not defend as Seventh-day Adventists that there is actually a mega story that might be true, which we call the Great Controversy? So, which gives us a handle on how we see the Bible, how we see the world, and how we see our own place in the world. So, Christians have some difficult times with postmodernity. But I think there are some things that Christians, and before we come to Seventh-day Adventists in particular, must consider, and that is that postmoderns have a justified criticism of modernism, namely that it is too rational. When they say that deconstruction is needed, then I think Christians will have to agree that much in church and theology could disappear without any problem. And so some deconstruction might well take place. Doctrines or spirituality, I think at least we must say that they are both important for a balanced Christian life, and we should not go overboard one way or the other. Everything is interpretation. The postmodern person says, well, no, not every interpretation is as good as any other. But we should remember that our interpretations are not absolute. And that is a problem we sometimes have. But I have changed my way of interpreting things quite often. I hope you have. A person who has never changed his mind, that doesn't give evidence of great thinking. I would hope that we have the ability to once in a while change our interpretations. Pardon? No. Okay. So, and we'll come back to that also. And when we talk about absolute truth, it's not a bad idea to shift the emphasis from truth as a system to truth as a person, a relationship to Jesus Christ. So that is some of the things I think Christians in general may consider when they deal with the challenges of postmodernism.